Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to Africa Alliance. Captain Ibrahim Traore has boldly spoken to those who accuse him and other Sahel leaders of being dictators. For decades, ever since the great Thomas Sankara was betrayed and removed from power, Burkina Faso and much of the Sahel have lived under the shadow of a Western political dream. Africa was repeatedly told that if it adopted Western-style democracy and imitated the lifestyle and systems of the West, prosperity would follow and life would improve dramatically. Yet when we examine the reality, a very different picture appears. For more than 60 years, politicians ruled across Africa and the Sahel under the banner of democracy. Now the young lion, Captain Ibrahim Traore, stands before the world and asks a powerful question: what has Africa truly gained from this democracy? The truth is bitter. Behind the cover of democratic rule, foreign interests moved into the Sahel and gradually took control of its wealth and resources. Gold was taken, manganese was taken, and along with them the dignity of the land was taken as well. While politicians delivered long speeches on television about freedom of speech and democratic values, ordinary people were losing the basic freedom to feed themselves. Powerful external forces quietly influenced the system, turning Africa's brightest doctors, hard-working nurses, talented lawyers, and top university graduates into low-paid workers abroad, cleaning buildings and washing dishes in Europe and America. The intellectual strength of Africa was drained and used elsewhere, all while the same system praised itself as a success of democracy. The question then becomes unavoidable: is this really the success that Africans are expected to celebrate? Traore has broken the silence with a voice that echoes like thunder. In his view, under the previous democratic system, the African citizen was becoming poorer day by day, while foreign interests were becoming richer every hour. Many politicians acted like sales agents for external powers, trading away the nation's resources and dignity for small personal benefits. State funds were looted, luxury mansions were purchased in France, and meanwhile African children walked barefoot on roads that had never been built. Decades of leadership pushed the country backward while still claiming progress and development. This system became what many call the democracy of the belly, where the only things that grew were the stomachs of corrupt politicians and the profits of foreign powers. The young leader has now declared that the era of political theater and empty promises must end. He has looked directly at the West and said that if their version of democracy brings poverty, exploitation, and endless political games, then Africa can keep its distance from it. He rejects a system where a corrupt politician can be elected every few years only to continue stealing from the nation. Traore insists that if providing food, security, and dignity to the population causes outsiders to label him a dictator, then those labels mean very little. He presents himself not as a dictator but as someone determined to liberate his people from both external influence and internal corruption. Across the continent, many people say they are exhausted. They are tired of theft, tired of empty promises, and tired of being told how to govern their own countries by outsiders who have never lived their reality. What the people want now is genuine development. They want to feel that they truly own their land and their future. Supporters of the Sahel's new political direction argue that in just 3 years this revolutionary path has delivered more tangible change than 60 years of traditional democratic politics. According to this narrative, Burkina Faso recently emerged as one of the top 3 best-performing economies in Africa, raising an important question. How can a country described as being under dictatorship achieve economic growth while so many democratic governments fail to deliver prosperity for their citizens? For many observers within the region, the illusion has faded and a new sense of clarity has appeared. For years, powerful global actors insisted that without their democratic approval and guidance, a nation would collapse economically and socially. They warned that ignoring their political models would cause economic ruin and widespread hunger. Yet Captain Ibrahim Traore has challenged these assumptions, rejecting the old textbooks and pursuing a different path. While politicians in other countries continue debating endlessly in parliament, the Sahel has focused on building industries, strengthening agriculture, and developing new economic strategies. Supporters of the current leadership describe the results as remarkable. Despite security challenges and external sanctions, Burkina Faso's economy reportedly performed strongly, surprising many international observers. Traoré introduced what he calls a strategy of sovereignty. Part of this approach involved nationalizing gold mines that had previously been dominated by foreign corporations. The message was clear: if foreign companies want access to the country's gold, they must refine it locally, pay fair value within the country, and respect the people whose land holds the resources. Another major initiative has been what Traoré calls the agricultural offensive. His reasoning is simple: a nation that cannot feed itself will always remain dependent on others. Under previous governments, many educated Africans left their homeland because there were few opportunities available. Today, the new policy focuses on turning agriculture into a powerful engine of wealth. Hundreds of tractors and large quantities of fertilizer have reportedly been distributed directly to farmers instead of passing through political middlemen. As a result, supporters claim that Burkina Faso achieved a grain surplus exceeding 6 million tons, marking a major step toward food security. Instead of relying on international food aid, the country aims to produce its own food and restore national dignity. At the same time, new industrial efforts have been launched. Critics abroad accuse Traoré of authoritarian leadership, but supporters argue that the real reason for criticism is that he is closing the doors to external exploitation. The country has built its first gold refinery and established tomato processing plants funded through community investment. This model uses capital gathered from the people to build industries that benefit the people. In the past, such industries were discouraged because the prevailing economic model expected African nations to export raw materials cheaply and then import expensive finished products from abroad. Traoré's policies aim to break that cycle and retain more value inside the country. The argument from his supporters is straightforward: when corruption and large-scale looting are reduced, the resources of the state can actually improve the lives of citizens. Engineers, doctors, and other professionals who once left the country are beginning to return and contribute to national development. Within the Sahel, many voices now say that they are no longer interested in a form of democracy that coincides with poverty and exploitation. If democracy results in stolen resources and hungry children, they argue, then that system has failed them. Instead, they claim they prefer a path built on sovereignty, dignity, and rapid development. According to this perspective, 3 years of focused action have produced visible changes. The economy is growing, agricultural storage facilities are full, and many citizens feel a renewed sense of pride and ownership in their country. When critics continue to call Traoré a dictator, his supporters respond by pointing to economic growth rates, new factories, and expanding agricultural production. They argue that the statistics themselves challenge the accusations. Looking back at previous decades, many people in the Sahel remember a time when migration was almost inevitable. Under earlier democratic governments, the region became a major source of migrants seeking work and survival abroad. Large numbers of young Africans left their homes because opportunities within their own countries were scarce. Today, the current leadership claims that it is working to reverse that trend by building an economy strong enough to keep its people at home and give them a future within their own land. Because many politicians were busy looting public money to buy apartments in Paris, they refused to build the hospitals where African doctors could actually work. They also refused to create laboratories where scientists could research and invent new solutions. Instead of investing in their own countries, they signed trade agreements that allowed foreign companies to control almost everything. As a result, some of Africa's most brilliant minds had no choice but to risk their lives crossing the dangerous Mediterranean Sea or desperately apply for visas to Western countries. When they finally arrived there, they were rarely treated like respected professionals. Highly trained surgeons ended up working as security guards. Skilled lawyers were forced to wash dishes. Qualified nurses worked as cleaners. Captain Ibrahim Traoré asked the world a serious question: is this really the democracy Africa is expected to follow? Is it a system where an African must travel thousands of miles just to clean the floor of someone whose country benefits from Africa's stolen resources? Traoré argues that this situation cannot continue. In his view, the politicians of the past acted like traffickers of African dignity. By keeping their own countries poor, they ensured that young people would feel forced to leave in search of survival. In return, those same politicians received foreign aid and praise from Western governments and media. They were celebrated internationally as champions of democracy while their own citizens struggled at home and worked low-paid jobs in cities like London and New York. According to this perspective, the system was designed to keep Africa functioning mainly as a service provider for Western economies. However, the recent political movement in the Sahel has introduced a new message. Instead of leaving, people should stay and help build their own nations. Supporters of Traoré say he is not a dictator but rather a leader calling his people back home to take control of their future. His vision focuses on building factories and developing mining industries where African engineers can lead and innovate. Clinics and hospitals are being renovated so doctors can treat their own communities instead of leaving for work abroad. The idea behind these policies is that when foreign exploitation and corrupt politics are reduced, a country can create an environment where educated citizens can stand proudly and be respected in their own homeland. The goal is to raise a generation that does not grow up believing their only future is serving wealthy nations overseas. Traoré has also argued that some Western powers regret losing their ability to attract and absorb Africa's most talented professionals through immigration systems. He has publicly stated that the Sahel does not need foreign visas if it can build strong opportunities at home. According to this message, the region intends to keep its people and its pride rather than exporting its brightest minds. The goal is to create a society where Africans feel respected and valued in their own countries rather than treated as second-class workers in foreign economies. Supporters describe this shift as the end of the long period when Africa's dignity was quietly stolen. To explain the situation more clearly, Traoré uses a powerful comparison. He asks people to imagine someone selling their father's house in exchange for only a single plate of rice. Would that person be called a leader or a traitor? For decades, critics say, some politicians in the Sahel behaved in exactly that way. They governed under the banner of Western-style democracy while secretly allowing resources and wealth to flow out of their countries. Traoré claims that this system hid widespread corruption and exploitation. While international observers praised political stability and democratic institutions, leaders behind the scenes were signing deals that handed national resources to foreign companies for extremely small returns. According to this narrative, the agreements made during the previous political era were deeply unequal. A politician might sit in a comfortable office in Ouagadougou wearing an expensive suit purchased in Paris and sign contracts giving foreign corporations up to 90% of the gold produced by a mine. The state might officially receive 10%, but even that portion could disappear through corruption into private bank accounts. In this way, critics say, national dignity was traded for small financial rewards. Politicians took commissions from infrastructure projects that were never completed, while the country remained underdeveloped. Meanwhile, many of those same leaders sent their own children to study in the Western countries that were benefiting from Africa's resources. Traoré has openly challenged this system by asking whether it represents the kind of democracy the Sahel should follow. He questions a political structure where a few individuals become extremely wealthy by selling the nation's resources while rural families struggle to find basic medicine for sick children. In his view, these politicians were not true leaders but intermediaries who maintained poverty. By keeping the country weak, they could continue winning elections through money and influence. Elections became less about public service and more like auctions where whoever spent the most money could gain power and continue exploiting the system for another 4 years. Supporters of the current government argue that the revolutionary movement in the Sahel has ended this cycle. They say Traoré is not a dictator but a protector who has closed the door against corruption and foreign exploitation. According to this narrative, national resources will no longer fund the luxurious lifestyles of a small political class. Within 3 years, the government claims to have recovered billions in stolen assets and redirected those funds toward a social emergency program aimed at helping ordinary citizens. Schools and clinics that previous politicians claimed were too expensive are now being built, while the lavish lifestyles of past leaders are being questioned. The argument presented by supporters is that when corruption is reduced, the wealth that once appeared as small crumbs can become enough to provide real benefits for the entire population. The central question repeatedly raised is simple: what tangible improvements did decades of democracy actually deliver for the people? For 60 years, citizens were told that development would eventually arrive. Yet critics argue that the only things that truly grew during that time were private bank accounts in Switzerland and expensive homes in European cities. Meanwhile, educated Africans often found themselves working low-wage jobs abroad despite their qualifications. Supporters claim that the current leadership has shown a different path. In only 3 years, they say, a determined leader committed to national development can achieve more progress than numerous politicians focused mainly on personal wealth. Burkina Faso's recent economic performance has been presented as evidence of this shift. Advocates argue that the country became one of the top 3 performing economies in Africa not by strictly following Western economic advice but by rejecting parts of it. Policies focused on reclaiming control over natural resources, strengthening agriculture, and reducing foreign exploitation. Traoré has responded directly to those who accuse him of authoritarian leadership. He argues that if refusing to allow his people to starve while outsiders profit from their minerals makes him a dictator, then critics can use that label if they wish. If prioritizing security for rural families rather than endless political debates means being called authoritarian, he says he accepts the criticism. His message is that the people of the Sahel are no longer interested in repeating the political systems that previously brought corruption and poverty. According to supporters of the current movement, the region wants genuine development, dignity, and the right to control its own future. They want a society where citizens feel respected and where national resources benefit the people who live on the land. In this narrative, the traditional ballot box system is described as something that once buried African hopes rather than protecting them. By contrast, the revolutionary spirit is portrayed as a revival of national power and self-determination. The final message presented in this perspective is a warning to outside powers: systems that have failed Africa in the past should not be forced upon it again. The Sahel intends to reject corruption, exploitation, and political manipulation. Instead, supporters say they are building a society of strong and responsible citizens where graduates can stand proudly and where workers can live from the fruits of their own labor. For them, the revolutionary path is not simply a political experiment but a matter of survival and national dignity. According to this vision, the old political era has ended. Factories are opening, development projects are moving forward, and the Sahel is striving for independence and self-reliance. The message concludes with praise for the region, support for Captain Ibrahim Traoré, and a call to defend the dignity and future of Africa. Finally, the audience is encouraged to like, comment, and subscribe to continue following the story.